Live report. We also continue to follow developing news as the 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman accused in the leaked military documents case appeared in federal court earlier today in Worcester. Western Mass News reporter Kristen Burnell was inside that courtroom and has the details.
21-year-old Jack Teixeira of North Dayton, Massachusetts appeared in federal court here in Worcester this afternoon. Now, no cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, but we were able to sit behind his parents. His mother appearing visibly emotional as she cried as soon as she saw her son enter the courtroom in handcuffs, an orange jumpsuit, and black rosary beads. Other family members also appeared visibly distraught for the near 90-minute long hearing. New evidence revealed on Thursday provided a deeper perspective into the life of the 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman accused of leaking highly classified military documents on the social media platform Discord. Our Western Mass News cameras were rolling as Jack Teixeira's parents entered the courthouse for a detention hearing that would decide if he'd be kept in custody until his trial or released to home confinement under other conditions. Prosecutors made their argument that Teixeira should remain in custody until his trial. They believe he still may have access to classified information. And following his arrest, they found a tablet, laptop, and Xbox, all of which had been smashed inside a dumpster at his home. Seen here in these photos obtained by Western Mass News by court documents, which also show what FBI agents found inside his room. In addition, prosecutors say he used his government computer to research past mass shootings and high-profile standoffs with federal agents. During Thursday's hearing, they also argued that in the past, Teixeira wrote on social media that he would kill, quote, a ton of people. Prosecutors emphasized that he, quote, remains a grave threat to national security and is a flight risk. Meanwhile, Teixeira's attorney argued that he is not a danger to the community and saying that prosecutors did not show that Teixeira ever intended leaked information to be widely spread online. The judge then questioned this argument, saying, quote, your argument is he had no idea it might not go beyond this little circle of people on the server. They also listed why he should be released under his father's supervision at his home in Massachusetts, under specific restrictions such as location monitoring and no access to the internet. His father, Jack Michael Teixeira, took to the stand for questioning, saying if his son were to violate conditions of release or home confinement, he would have to report him. Ultimately, the judge did not issue a ruling today. He said he is considering both sides of the arguments before he makes a decision. Reporting in Worcester, Kristen Burnell, Western Mass News.